Good evening, everybody here in the Orange Hall and all those who are joining us online. I'm happy I have the opportunity given to me by our curator of the BK Talks to say a few words. My name is Dick van Gamer, I'm the Dean of this faculty, and for 1 year now. And I think, a year ago I started a conversation with Javier how we could turn our beautiful Orange Hall, a space that is normally full of energy, and also now, even with less people, I feel the energy, but how to make it even more a platform for our faculty, for our community as a whole. There are always many events, many things happening, lectures, seminars, discussions, but what I've missed in the last years when I was working here, a debate between all the people, all the different opinions, to really engage our whole faculty in discussions. And that's how the idea of the BK Talks came about. And Javier developed a beautiful program. And our idea was indeed to start this in September, as we do now. Of course, when we started our discussion, we thought it would be in a completely filled auditorium here and people passing by and just, listening what is happening here. Unfortunately, well, we all know that at this moment it's not possible, but we decided still to start our BK Talks. That together, of course, with the already almost traditional Berlage lectures, will create a full program every Thursday evening in our faculty. So tonight the first BK Talks, and I think the topic, the discussion that will be held is very important, and so I think it's also really an excellent sign. I'm really happy that all of you can be here and will have this discussion, because I think it's the best start of the BK Talks to start the debate of tonight. So I won't bore you anymore with my introduction. The floor is to our guests and to Javier.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you, everyone. Members of the panel tonight and members of the audience and the audience at home. It is really a pleasure for me to start this adventure tonight. Over 1 year ago, Dick called me and asked me to start doing this. I'm preparing a public programs for the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. I took the challenge and we have started. More or less, you know that the situation is not really as business as usual, so we all of a sudden had to start preparing a whole TV set. I didn't know that I would end up working on TV, but it seems to be working. So I want to thank very much, first of all, Dick, for giving me the opportunity to try to organize a full calendar of events that will be happening most Thursdays of the year. We have distributed Thursdays between the BK Talks and the Berlage keynotes. You will see we have already a full calendar for both semesters for the next year. Topics with the BK Talks will move from We Matter today, which has to do with design and inclusiveness, and then we will talk about politics, we will talk about design, we will talk about certain different topics, not only about urbanization or architecture or design itself, but the idea is to try to bring other topics from outside academia. One of the things that I always wanted to do since I started organizing these lectures was, or lectures of panels actually, was to try to bring together the members of our faculty who work in their corners and in their offices, put them together in front of an audience, which is our students. The idea is to, let's say, we do this for our students, and we do this for you. Not so many today because of obvious reasons, but those at home. And the first thing that I thought it was a good idea was to get started with a panel organized by students. Sam and Yael, who are here tonight, have done a terrific work in order to organize this panel tonight. They first talked to Dick, then they talked to me. And one of the things I said, oh, this is a fantastic opportunity. Let's get started by students organizing a panel, because at the end of the day, the BK talks or the public programs are meant to be for them. So I'm very thankful, not only to Dick, but to Sem and Yael, who have put this all together tonight. Let's see what happens. This is, logistically speaking, a big hassle, all right? So we hope it works very well. I want to thank also Lex Delot, who has been helping us out, all of us, with logistics. It hasn't been easy. And also, I would like to thank the team members of Collegiarama, for whom this is also a, let's say, a brand new thing. It seems to be working very well. Philip is also helping there with the sound system, as well as marketing and communications of the Faculty of Architecture. They also help us putting this all together. This is a big collective activity. I know it takes time to acknowledge and to thank people, but this is extremely important. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible to put all this together. We will have the chance to go through the calendar in other moments. I just want to give the floor to Sem and Yael to let us know what is it that we have to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javier, for giving us the floor. I think we're going to stand over here. So, welcome everyone tonight at the first BK Talks. We Matter Designing the Inclusive World. We would like to welcome our panel members, Amy, Roberto, Anagha, and Aart. And we would also like to congratulate David Keyson as our panel member, but also as the new diversity officer of the TU Delft. And maybe it's also good to know B News, our independent faculty magazine, is here tonight to write about this evening. So, who are we? My name is Sem and Yael, and we are going to moderate this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So last year, Sam and I were part of the Stylos board when in June the Black Lives Matter movement started. And we were actually discussing as a board what we should do with this discussion and, well, actually not a discussion, with the movement. And we decided to make a statement acknowledging structural racism in the world. But most importantly, we came to the conclusion that we had to talk about it, because this is also an issue in our profession. So we went to Dick, and this evening is actually a result of that.
So yeah, and we are at an important moment in time, because the transatlantic world is kind of questioning her history. So what we have to figure out what to do with our slavery history, but also with the new cultural challenges globalization brought to us, for example. And this is why we also want to broaden the subject. So we don't want to talk only about racism, but we want to talk about inclusiveness.
So let's talk about the definition. The definition of inclusive design is the design of an environment so that it can be accessed and used by as many people possible, regardless for gender, race, age, sexual preference, and disability. Tonight we will focus on gender and race. We also want to say that for the discussion, we want to create a safe environment, since it's a topic that can be very personal. We want everybody to feel freely but respectfully. And if people are uncomfortable with things being said, please let us know and tell, so we can take each other to account and keep a friendly atmosphere.
Yeah, and our goal for this night is to start a conversation. How are we going to address inclusiveness? We want to achieve this by talking about the practice and also to talk about our education, the education at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. First, all the panel guests will show one image, which gives answer to the question, what image comes in mind when you think about designing the inclusive world, to see their point of view. Then we will start with the first theme, the practice. We have questions for the panel members, and after that we will have 2 statements. And then David Keyson is going to show his vision of the education and diversity in the TU Delft. And then we will talk about the education. And here we will also have questions for the panel members and also 2 statements. And after that point of view, we are going to talk about the future. How are we going to address this in the future?
So let's talk about the panel. First of all, we want to introduce Lyongo Juliana. Lyongo is director of the Caribbean region at OZ Architects. He studied architectural engineering at the TU of Eindhoven. As an architect in residence at Oskamp, he is investigating the degree of diversity and inclusiveness of architecture in Amsterdam, and he wants to create a broader cultural perspective within the architectural world. Welcome.
Amy Thomas is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Architecture in the chair of History of Architecture and Urban Planning. And her teaching and research focuses on the relationship between political economy and the built environment. Amy is an advocate for equality, diversity, and inclusion in architectural education and research, working to improve access to architectural education in all of Europe. Thank you for joining the panel, Amy.
Then next up we have Roberto Rocco. Roberto is an associate professor of spatial planning and strategy at the TU Delft. His research focuses on metropolitan and regional governance, social sustainability, and spatial justice. And he's responsible for course development and coordination. Also, welcome.
Then we have Anagha Yoganand. She is currently doing an MSc under the Building Technology track at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. She also chairs BOUT, the study association of the INT department. And her academic background in architecture and 2 years of practice in India has helped her understand the technical details and implication of attaining sustainable designs that impact the overall performance of buildings. So thank you for joining us, Anagha, tonight.
Then we have Aart Oxenaar. It's a bit strange with the circle. Aart studied art history and archaeology at the University of Amsterdam. He is specialized in architectural history. He was founding creator of the Center for Architecture and Urbanism in Tilburg. He also was the director of Amsterdam Academy of Architecture before coming to the TU Delft as director of education of the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. He also acted as project leader for the EAAE project design, design and urbanism. Also welcome.
Yes, and we would have Bo Oskamp in the panel. She's a bachelor student, but unfortunately she couldn't join. But luckily, David is here to join us tonight to be part of the panel, so that's really nice. So thank you, David, that you could fit into the panel tonight.
Yeah, welcome everybody. I think we're going to back this way.
That's also easier because it's pretty difficult in this circle.
But welcome everybody. We are really happy that you wanted to participate in this panel, and we are also really happy to see that we have a really diverse panel. So right now we'd like if you could introduce yourself a bit by the picture or the image actually you brought when we asked the question, what image comes to mind when you think about the designing the inclusive world? Okay, I also have this one. Yes, so the images we're going to talk about first. Lyongo.
Where I sit here, right?
You can sit down, yeah.
Well, thinking about my studies on diversity and inclusion, I was thinking about a picture, and I thought this was the best one that I could find up to now. This is the shared space behind the central station of Amsterdam. And the inclusion means sharing. We're gonna have to share the space of this country together. And that's what you see happening there. Everybody has their direction where they want to go to, but you will have to take the other one into consideration to be able to go where you want to go to. And that is, I think, the message I would like to share with this image. So if you continue your straight line like you were going, you will probably hit in someone else. But if you take consideration of the other one, you acknowledge the other, then you both can continue your direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lyongo. Amy, your picture.
Okay, you can hear me, good. Thank you for the introduction. So this is an image called Modular by Thomas Carpentier. He's a designer who challenges the idea of the standard in architecture. And of course, it's a playful reinterpretation of an image we probably all know well, Le Corbusier's modular man, but using differently abled forms. And Corbusier, the idea behind the original modular man was to provide what Corbusier called a range of harmonious measurements to suit the human scale, universally applicable to architecture and all mechanical things. So it was this idea, basically, that the human form could be used as a basis for buildings, but it goes back on this long tradition of the ideal human form, using very these kind of ideal ratios, the golden ratio, kind of perfect numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, which is a basis for measurements. And I chose this image because, to me, it represents a shift that's underway in the way we think about architecture, in the way we think about architectural education, which is sort of rethinking and re-evaluating the legacies of a kind of Western-centric canon, which privilege this kind of modernist lineage of the standard. So standardization was one of the key ideas of modernism and one of its main legacies, the idea that you could produce something that was universal and transcended the differences of different places, different cultures, different peoples, and the ability to produce something en masse. So it assumed a kind of standard user. And I think what Black Lives Matter has shown, what Me Too has shown, what the pandemic has shown, is that the standard user is a very privileged user, actually, in our society, and that the world is made up of predominantly non-standard users. And so if we want to teach in an inclusive way, we need to reappraise the kind of values and norms that we have at the moment in architecture. And as a historian, for me, that means using the canon to critique the canon in the way that Thomas Carpentier has done here with this very iconic form, but then used it to sort of, in a playful way, undermine it. And I'll just sort of end with a quote by Carpentier. He says, "The body is not standard. It's sometimes tall, sometimes small, fat, thin, wizened, deformed, twisted, scalped. Such a variety of feelings that the norm cannot and do not want to report." Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much. Roberto.
So thanks for the introduction. As you can see, I didn't bring an image, but I brought numbers. And for a number of years, I give an introductory workshop about intercultural communication to all new master students at PK. That's a huge honor for me. And this year we did it online, and I had the opportunity to ask a question. Who are your heroes? And we discussed, and we were using this Mentimeter, and these are the results. I would say that the results are not as bad as I expected. They are promising. We are getting somewhere in terms of diversity, but there is a lot of ground to cover. As you can see, most of the architects, they are white, and most of them are men. But what those numbers don't show is that a huge number of students chose Starchitects as their heroes. Why is that a problem? The architects are alarmingly homogeneous. They're all Northern European men, and these are the heroes. So I think it's in the core of diversity to give attention, to widen our scope of attention to different things. So I'm not saying that we should look the other way and not look at the architects. We all love Peter Zumthor, but we should be able to look at other things that are different, other people who are different. So I'd like to quote my hero, Patsy Healy, a British planner, who says, "We must recognize that we are diverse people living in a complex web of economic and social relations within which we develop potentially very varied ways of seeing the world, of identifying our interests and values, of reasoning about them, and of thinking our relations with others." Thank you.
Thank you. Anagha, you're next, I think.
Yeah, so this is the image that really comes to my mind when we think of inclusive design, because this is a stained glass painting by Louis Comfort Tiffany, somewhere around the 1800s, where he really tried to portray the tree of life, which has several sacred connotations in every religion, almost. Like, though it has a different underlined meaning in every part of every religion. I mean, overall, what it really tries to say that everything is interconnected. So if you actually also see this image, you really see leaves of different size, shapes, color, you know. So it's the same species, but in different representations, but all under one umbrella. So this is what really stood out to me, and this is what is really inclusiveness. It's largely that everything is really one, despite, you know, from where we come, what we are, what we look like. So, yeah, this is my representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Aart, could you tell us about the image?
Thank you. The sun was just gone when I took the picture, I'm sorry. A couple of days ago, I took a walk around one of the canals while thinking of the question you posed me and thinking about an image. And maybe because I was looking down pensively, I've passed this building many times, but I hadn't seen that there is a text which is actually a stone in the pavement. And in English it says, "The school that fully fulfills her goals is a workspace of humanity. It enlightens the mind of the pupils through the glitter of knowledge." It's not the best translation, but that's pretty much what it says. It's a quote by Comenius, who lived in this house for a while in Amsterdam. Thinker, educator, educational innovator. And I think it's a quote that beautifully reflects the three layers, you could say, that we deal with when we think about inclusiveness in the context of a school. It indicates that it's a broad social issue. It has to do with how we connect to each other as people within humanity, you could say. But it also indicates that it's an issue that needs to be addressed within the school. As a school, as the Faculty of Architecture here, we have to and should deal with this issue. But I think very important also is that it indicates it's a very personal, very individual issue. And that makes this house important. Like you said, I studied history, art history and architecture history in Amsterdam, but I also worked as a tour guide on the canal boats. And when I began to study, social issues were very strong. Marxism was still strong. We were very much looking at class differences. Then feminism came in. We started looking at gender differences, at the role and the image of women in art. But as a tour guide, I came to a third layer that was not that familiar to me then, when I was praising these beautiful canals, telling about the history of these houses, of the culture of freedom and openness in Amsterdam. And then there was an architect from Suriname, and I'll never forget his comment. He said, yeah, that was interesting, but it was at the cost of the blood of my forefathers, because slavery was a very important aspect. And fairly recent, I read about and saw there's a beautiful book by Jennifer Tosh on the Black Heritage Tours. So it's very important also that in your personal development, the way you look at things, this aspect is taken into account, and also that you, well, basically are constantly re-educating yourself. Your view is changing all the time and should be changing. And I guess that's something we should try to bring into this faculty as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I choose this very simple image. It's a public image. It's not copyrighted. But it's basically about people. We begin with people, I think, in any building are the people that make it. And actually, I found this symbolic because the hands were upwards, and it's really about creating new perspectives and insights and creativity and knowledge. So I think this really depicts that. But if I were to choose a building, if I had the chance to pick a picture, what really struck me, in the summer I visited the American War Cemetery in Normandy, and there is a multi-religious, beautiful building where anybody is welcome to pray in, and I thought that was very symbolic. And you see also the graves with the different religious symbols on them as well, and it's kind of heartening in a way to see all these thousands of graves and all these people together. It's kind of sad, huh? It's the end of the line for them, but I thought it was very symbolic that it was this sense of togetherness and inclusiveness, and reflected in the prayer area itself.
Thank you. So now we have a collective image of what comes to mind for our panel guests when we think about designing the inclusive world, which brings us to the first point of view, the practice of architecture and the built environment. And actually, we have some questions to start with, just to get a view on the current situation. Lyongo, I have a question for you. Because as an architect, do you think that we are designing and building the inclusive world right now?
No, not really. I think a lot of architects are not even aware of whom they are designing for. And the sad thing is that you are very seldomly confronted with the fact how the Dutch society is built up, especially the bigger cities, where you have more than 50% of the people that live there have a migration background. So everyone, for instance, in Amsterdam is part of a minority. There's no majority anymore. And if you would look at the news, which I did during COVID or during Corona, especially in the beginning, and at a certain point it started to frustrate me, because the only people that came into the news at 8 o'clock were basically white. And you could do it any week. I did it for 1 week and compiled all the people that came on the news, and they were only white. If I go to a conference on architecture, the first one I went to after 12 and a half years of living in Curaçao was the Nationale Monumenten Congress. And in a group of 500, I was the only one. So it's about representation, but it's more about realization that who you are working for. If we don't change that, for instance, who are going to maintain the canals or the buildings on the canals in Amsterdam if you don't get the Moroccan or someone with Moroccan descent, Antillean descent, Surinamese descent interested in your monuments? Because the group of white people will become smaller and smaller and smaller. That is a reality that you have to deal with. That is one part, and the other part is knowing who you're building for. It's not just about ethnicity, but also about age, also about living alone. There's more than 3 million Dutch that live by themselves. What are their requirements? We are still designing as if everybody has a wife or has a partner and has two kids, but we have many different forms of living together now. So it's about those things that we as architects are too focused on the star architects and trying to solve social social issues of our society has moved to the back. At the beginning of modernism, it was quite normal to meet each other on social issues. And so if we don't do something about it, I'm quite worried.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a more also personal question. You already addressed it because you lived a long time in Curaçao. We also heard about the star architect, or well, maybe my personal reference is also quite often a white male, the Le Corbusier architect. I was actually wondering, because you've been an architect in Curaçao and also in the Netherlands, do you have the feeling that people look differently at you as an architect due to your skin tone?
Well, if I enter a room, they will not think I'm the architect. I can be anything else. I don't know if you ever went to the Provada. Because of also have worked in the Caribbean, where I am part of the majority, I know that you are treated differently. I can feel the difference. Sometimes it starts the moment you enter a plane, because they cannot place you. I enter the plane, and then I'm still working. And normal would be that at a certain point, the stewardess would ask you something. You know, hey, sir, you're still working. But they do communicate with me, but they feel uncomfortable to communicate with me because they cannot place me in the yeah, how you say, in het hokje, in the box.
In the box, yeah.
Yes, you are treated differently, but it's also in Curaçao, because the top of construction in Curaçao, on the other hand, is also a lot of time Dutch companies. So I had actually someone doing supervision for me, which was white, lived on the islands for more than 30 years, and we would be on the building site, and he would be the architect, and I would be his helper. Yes, you are treated differently, and we have to start to accept that. I mean, I don't go out anymore, but I have had that experience of going to a discotheque and not being accepted. And you have no idea what that does to you if you are a highly educated person that has a job. But even if you're not, but you're not a harm to anyone, but you're not allowed to enter, just based on your skin color. And if you say anything, they say, no, but it's members only. So you say, okay, I want to become a member. No, that's not possible tonight. So yes, you are treated differently.
And is it sometimes also the other way around? Let's say there is a project in Amsterdam-Oost. Do people value your cultural background?
Well, it's starting now, and it's, the examples I gave were quite in your face, but it's very subtle also. I worked in a company in Amsterdam. I was never asked to go on any of the commissions, only on the excursion commission. I moved to Curaçao, and I was asked to go on many commissions there. Because, yes, they realize maybe I'm an easy talker, I like to make jokes, but not that you are a serious thinker. You also meet it, sometimes I have clients that have difficulty to accept, or people I work with, to accept that I would know the answer or see a problem that they don't see, and maybe I do that because I can see something they don't see, but they would not accept that. It's very subtle also in, for instance, doing presentation techniques. When I was in university, I made water turquoise, and the teacher told me that water doesn't have that color. I said, yes, for me, water has that color because I grew up in the Caribbean. He said, no, water should be gray. And it's those little things that we need to change. That is what I mean with, you have to, when someone confronts you with another information that say it's wrong, that you ask, but how, by why is the water turquoise for you?
Well, thank you so much for your openness. I'm actually really interested also in the research side.
Yes, so I'm going to ask some questions to Roberto and Amy, because you are doing some research together, right? So maybe it's good for the panel members to know, what are you researching right now? So, and really short, and why do you think it's so important?
Thanks, Roberto. Well, so the research I'm doing in this area is actually looking at architecture schools in Europe. So I'm working with a lot of collaborators in different European architecture schools, just to try to understand what's going on in terms of inclusivity, because the numbers are strange. I mean, if we just take gender, which is something I've looked at the most, we see that student numbers are about 50-50 in architecture school, but the process of attrition by the time you get into the profession is, you know, in the Netherlands, I think it was 23% of architects are women. So why is that happening? And we are trying to understand it from the academy. So it begins here. It has to begin here, because this is where your training, this is where your exposure to mentors occurs. This is where the cultures of architecture are embedded within you. Long working hours, this very sort of, if I may say, egocentric model of excellence, you know, maybe unrealistic expectations of what that means. And I think the challenges that we see is really just the lack of data, that there isn't enough information on why this happens. And it requires a kind of many-faceted approach to doing the research. You need to be talking to people who are in these professions. You need to be collecting statistical data as well, so we can get a really good overview of the kind of European landscape. And that requires collaboration on a bigger scale, and it requires the input of regulators as well. So who's regulating the architectural profession in each of these countries, and what influence do they have on inclusivity in architectural education? I think what we've sort of come to the conclusion is that there are two facets that have to change within educational institutions. One is the structure and one is the culture. So there's a kind of hard and a soft approach. Culturally, it's about enabling a curriculum which is more inclusive. And I say enable here because I think for the most part, teachers are actually willing to do it. They just don't have the time to educate themselves to be able to be more inclusive in their teaching. And that's a really difficult thing. The publish or perish culture is very, very tough. So there's also a huge amount of pressure on teachers. I think it's also about training. It's about popularizing the issue, having events like this that actually, you know, enable a kind of culture of discussion around things, and getting rid of that fear factor, you know, oh, because I'm a white male, I shouldn't be talking about these issues. Well, of course you should. You know, everybody has to buy into this. So that's one thing, and then structurally, you know, it's about hiring processes and getting those things sorted, which, you know, surprisingly are still not that great, honestly. So, you know, who's being hired and how is that process being monitored? It still needs work. So, yeah, I guess it's a bit more of a sort of boring institutional research angle I'm coming at, but it's really kind of the fundamental elements of how we embed inclusivity in an education. I'm going to stop talking, so give it to Roberto.
Yeah, maybe a question for Roberto, because is there actually much research on this subject in our field, or not?
Well, Amy and I, we have a project. We are trying to discuss values, design for values. There is a platform at TU Delft called Delft Design for Values, of which Amy is a part of the board. Was. And that particular platform is interested in understanding what are the values that guide us when we are designing. And there is a multitude of values that people think when they are designing. But I think we have to bring the value of diversity much stronger to the table, especially because of what you just said. The world is changing very quickly. And as architects and designers, we must design, that's what I believe, we design for the public. We design for the public, for the city, for the public sphere. So who are we designing for? That's the question that we actually want to answer in this book we are organizing.
Thank you.
I think I'll just add to that to say there's an amazing amount of work coming out at the moment, being generated on all these issues of race and architecture, decolonizing architectural curricula and the history of architecture, gender. There's been a huge body of feminist research that's been coming out for decades now. There's more and more stuff on disability. So there is, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years, a massive interest in this field, and it's becoming more and more mainstream, actually. And so it should become more and more easy to teach, too.
Thank you.
Okay,
Are there any questions to Lyongo, Amy, and Roberto from the other panels about what they just said?
Otherwise, we'll just dive in with the first statement.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, I had a comment. I mean, I think it's very, very important, the research, because as Yael said in the beginning, it can be quite emotional, this discussion. But working with numbers to show people that, okay, we have so many people of a different descent, we have so many women, that you're not talking about a feeling that you're doing it right or wrong, but that you have numbers. That's one point I wanted to make. And the other, I think there should never be an excuse to be inclusive. So if the professors here say they have no time, it's the same as the Dutch Soccer Federation is doing at this moment, that they didn't have time to have a proper selection procedure for a new head coach of the Dutch squad, which is an excuse. And those are the excuses that maintain the system that we have. And that is about, again, the movie I showed in the beginning. Some people will have to make space for the others to move in. Otherwise, nothing will happen, because there's always an excuse to stay within your system.
Yeah.
Can I just come back there? I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think I'm looking at a kind of realistic picture at the moment, for example, where people are going crazy for online education and preparing a course is always done in between everything else. And I think everybody tries their best. But you're right, there's not really an excuse not to do this. It's going to take some time. It's going to be a slow process, but we should get there. And the numbers thing is really critical, because particularly in a technical university where statistics and these kind of hard data formats are really privileged is so important to getting a message out. And I think the whole concept of scientific neutrality needs to be challenged, really, on this basis.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's start with the first statement. I already see that this is a topic we can talk probably way longer than 2 hours, but the first statement we actually came up with, yeah, the letter type is a bit small, but I will read it out loud. As long as the field of architecture and the built environment is not a representative reflection of society, we cannot design and build an inclusive world. So we're really interested in all your thoughts from everybody, not only the research and Lyongo, the architect, but everybody. I don't know, somebody maybe who wants to start?
Well, maybe if I may, very short.
Yeah.
Oh, you wanted, you go ahead. No, the fact you don't see is that I have a white mother. That's because of biology. I turn out brown if you have a black father and a white mother. So I cannot choose for either. I mean, I choose for both. And so representation doesn't have to be in the fact that you need more black people, but you need the fact that you need to know their history. And the problem we have in the Netherlands is that probably a lot of you would, if you would ask me where you're from and I would say Utrecht, you would not be satisfied with that answer. But all my ancestors are Dutch. I have no ancestors that are non-Dutch. That are non-human I do have, but not non-Dutch. So I think it's representation is not only in color or in gender. I have 3 daughters, so I live with 4 women. So I think I know a little bit about women, but I don't think, I know that much that I know that I shouldn't have certain opinions. For instance, how painful is giving birth. I have no opinion about that because I don't know, I have not experienced that. So I have to give space to my wife to tell me about that or other women to tell me about it.
Okay, Anagha, what did you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to add to that and also the previous statements that all the 3 panelists made. So one is, I think, largely about accessibility. So I think the more a design is accessible, you know, or like a space is accessible to people, I think the more included, you know, a person feels. So that is one. And second also is education in some way, but not education in the sense of like a system or like a university space. But what I'm really trying to point at when I say education is the fact that each of us should really understand the sense of sensitivity, or rather, you know, have that little curiosity to know more about the other person, or you know, where they come from or their background. And I think the more knowledge the person has who's really kind of, you know, even trying to interact or like be with someone, I think that would already kind of inform them as to how you can make a person feel inclusive, you know. So I think these are like the 2 very key aspects in that sense. And yeah, I think that's where we're at. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else who wants to? Aart?
Thinking a little bit of what is the field of architecture. That's a complicated one. Is that society asking questions? So should we address society as we are sitting here? What tasks are you framing, or what programs are you stating for architecture? Or is it the market that determines what they want to build? Or is it architects and urbanists that have a say in how they want to build it? And I think that's a triangle which is quite an important, also complicated one. And yes, from the perspective of architecture schools, it's extremely important that we create the awareness for what does it mean that you pick up a question and you answer it, and how critical are you towards the question that you're being given. But then also architects work in the market and they have formal clients that tell them what to build. So I'm a bit confused or not, find it difficult to give a clear answer on what is the field of architecture and how are we in that. But maybe that's also part of the problem.
Yeah, we were more thinking about the people who are actually designing and building, so who has also have the final say in how our built environment looks like. But of course, that is a big
Who has the final
group.
say? Yeah, here we
who
go
has
again.
the final say? Yeah, maybe we should define it to the architects, the urbanists, the people on behind the sketching table.
So I think one of the subjects I'll mention in the vision part is gendered innovations. So it's actually about if a building's being designed for a certain public or diverse public, then those very designers should be diverse themselves, because there's no way you can possibly maybe understand the inherent differences based on sex and gender that one may have if you're not from that sex or gender yourself. So that's very essential, I think.
But should you work with these people to understand them better? So do you need those people in your direct workspace?
Yeah, you need them.
I think that is the main question here.
But there are actually cognitive differences in the way people process information and even space. So, for example, it's generally recognized that women are much better at multitasking and doing many things simultaneously as compared to most men. It's stereotyping here, but there's generally differences. So if you're designing a certain product or interactive system in a building, it may not be a simple monotasking interaction. You could have a multitasking kind of interaction, or multiple things could take place. And so it could be a much more, perhaps even richer interactive experience if a female designer was working on the system than a male designer would, in terms of their approach in designing the interaction. So it's very hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and try to design from their perspective. Of course, you can read about it, you can study it, but I think there's also the element of creativity and inspiration that's hard to replace that if it's not in your own mind, so to speak. So I come from myself from the Faculty of Industrial Design, so it's very similar. I think we're both in the design sector, and I think it's very relevant, this whole notion of gendered innovation for our fields especially. It's also very much also in other sectors, for example, in health, in medicine, where they're trying to expand the sample group and understand differences in actual cell structures and things like that.
Yeah, I see Roberto and I see Lyongo. First, Roberto?
I so agree with what you're saying, these cognitive differences, and how can you design for someone who is so different from you, right? But I think that's the cue for us to question what's the role of the architect and the designer. And can we imagine new roles for architects in which architects, for example, are co-designing with other people instead of dictating what's going to happen like Le Corbusier used to do? So my point is that if you want to design a child-friendly building or a child-friendly city, ask children. You have to design with people, I think. And that demands a little bit of effort from us to change our view of the profession, I think.
Just to give a quick example of what you're saying, if you're ever in Olympiaplein in Amsterdam, there's a nice sports park there, and it was designed by children, and it's a huge success.
Yes, I wanted to react first on, I don't remember his name, sorry, about the different people. But I think the moment you are aware, you have this sensitivity towards that different people do things differently and think that it's completely logic, it's easier to adapt to another one again. So because something happens and you realize, hey, this happens different, and you don't judge immediately, you start asking, but why are you doing that? So I think because of the monotonous world of architecture that is completely westernized, basically, and besides that, the other part is about asking questions. I think it's good to ask questions, but maybe even better to observe. If you have to design for children, go to places where a lot of children are and try not to be present and see what they are doing and try to understand it, why they are doing that and what do they envy to do. I think that is something that is lacking in education, in architectural education, is to go and observe the location where you're going to build, try to feel what's happening there. So I think that is very, very important to observe.
I'd like to add to that. Like you all were saying, really observing patterns. I think this is something that architects as a tool can really use digital means at this point, because I really can envision when you're talking about really sensing patterns that we could really have some sort of a sensory sort of system already inbuilt where, these patterns are really monitored and traced and they won't be biased, right? Because they're not really sensed by a human in that sense. So unbiased sort of, pattern recognition, and this could really translate into a good informed design in some way, but of course we can speculate how much digital data or digital sensors can really track versus how much a person being there can really sense, because there is a difference, but it's something that could make a difference.
I think what's also interesting field is design anthropology. So in fact, you use design as an instrument to study and understand people and their societies better. And you can see it as an iterative process because you learn more, you gain more insights through your design artifact or system, and you can then improve it. And that's very much based on doing field work like you're suggesting too.
I have a question for Lyongo, because you told, okay, we really have to experience what are they doing and really have to look. But I think a lot of architects actually think they are analyzing and looking at people, but they are not really looking at people actually. So if they maybe children are difficult, but if they have to work with them, maybe they're confronted. So I don't think.
So you mean a more diverse work environment?
Yeah, so a more
versus
diverse work
talking?
environment, but because I think a lot of architects actually think they are really looking into people, but they actually don't. So they should be confronted in an environment problem.
Yes, it's of course it makes it easier when you have a diverse team, but you must also be willing to listen. You know, we have a quite diverse company, but we have still some big steps to take to make it an inclusive company. So if your Chinese colleague comes with an idea that you take, but this is not how we do this in the Netherlands. And then it's finished. There's no space anymore for discussion about the team. You know, and you should ask the next question actually. But okay, please explain me where does this idea come from? Can you explain me why you want it this way? And then maybe the person can come with an idea that you could never have thought of because the limitations of the culture you grew up in. And we all have those limitations, and that's so interesting of working in a diverse team, because then the other team members can take away each other's blind spots. And that is, so it's not about just having them there, but also willing to listen.
Thank you. I think we can do one last comment.
Yeah, or maybe make a bridge to the next statement.
Okay, wait. Then I will conclude this statement, because I wrote some things down, and I think we can conclude that a diverse team is really beneficial to your design, and most importantly that we have to be aware for who are we designing, and we really have to look into that, and we really have to look better at the people we are designing for, and question for who are we designing actually. And maybe digital tools are also useful for that. So that's how I want to conclude probably. And we can go to the next statement. Shall I read it out, or do you want to read it out? Okay, governments should introduce a diversity quota for companies to diversify their workplace with regard to gender and race. So it's kind of connected to the other statement, but I think, do you think the government should do this? Is there someone who wants to react on this?
Didn't we specify it as government should introduce a diversity quota for schools? That's in the end what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we're also getting to education, but we could already do it. Maybe it is interesting. Lyongo already talked about a diverse workplace that he's working in, but I think it's interesting to specify it to the education. Yeah.
What the University of Eindhoven just did. So they made a
yeah,
interesting
that's a good example.
Yeah. Well, Aart, would you like to share your opinion, since you're already talking?
Well, I mention this because I don't know much about companies in the broader sense, or at least that's not what I'm thinking, what I'm working on. But here in this community, if you listen to what's being said, yes, it's very important to have diverse voices, to have diverse point of views. Also maybe to help architects, urbanists, landscape architects in training to be aware of what you were talking about, and more of you were talking about, that there are very different ways people live, that are very different views on how you want to live, that there's very different behavior between different people, and that you cannot project your own idea about it on others. And that's something architects and designers always have been very good at. And often with the best, in their best intentions. We all know these Dutch architects, Aldo van Eyck and his whole team, they would go to Africa and study the Dogon and bring great ideas of how they lived and project them on the Netherlands. Maybe it would have been a somewhat better idea to talk to Dutch people or talk to the people they were going to build for and ask them, how would you like to live? Which then also happened, of course, that began to change. But this is also an attitude thing. So the more diverse culture, the more diverse people, the more diverse views you get in your architecture school, and the more you learn to react to diverse questions. And I think that's extremely important. We have a wonderful tradition of social housing in the Netherlands, but it's a rather benign tradition where we from the schools and we from the housing corporation kind of know how to build for you. And ever since the 70s and 80s, we've tried to open up, we've tried to develop new models to do it, but still it's difficult to do it. And of course, money and the building companies still are very important in that as well.
Amy?
Well, yes, I think yes, that's my answer. I think it was interesting, the TU Eindhoven experiment, which I think actually was reneged upon, or withdrawn, but there were
outlawed, I think.
Yeah.
This was the idea that, was it just at professorial level, but basically for 2 years the university was only going to hire women at a professorial level, I think. And many women were actually quite upset by it because of this fantasy that we're hired on merit. And, you know, it is a fantasy because of implicit bias. We can't say that, oh, you know, if a university says, well, we're just going to hire the best people, of course that's not how it works because of the way that implicit bias works. And if you have one woman on a hiring team who's supposed to be the female voice there, she won't have a voice because there's only one woman instead of, you know, 30% of women, which is what's actually needed for a voice to be heard in a group like that. So, you know, I think quotas are good. I think they're a necessary corrective. And if you just take the example of our faculty, the architecture department just had 2 women from the TU Delft Fellowship, which only hires women tenure track positions. And these are 2 fantastic scholars. So there's no argument about there not being a talent pool there. So, yeah, I'm for quotas.
If I may, what's the argument against this? Is that we don't want to have quotas because we want the best people to be here, right? That argument hides the fact that there are structural injustices in the world that don't let the best people be here, right? So in order to correct that, we need that. So in order to correct the structural injustices, we need to make an exception and make differences for people to come here. I'm really favorable, and I think this has been happening, about inviting people to come here. Inviting people from Africa, from other parts of the world to come here and teach, for example.
So we have to actively ask people to come here. And for how long do we have to do this? For a short amount of time, or when it's 30% women in the top? So does everybody actually agree on that we have to do this?
Yeah. If I can just reflect on the Delft DTF program, it's not a quota system. It's actually a positive stimulus to increase the number of female professors who are outstanding associate professors. So I don't see that as a quota system. And I think getting back to this quote, the statement here, I think many industries, big corporations especially, realize the value of diversity. It actually increases their productivity and output and knowledge. So they see it as something positive, not something that's enforced upon them. And I think we need to get away of this notion is diversity is something that we have to do because we have to, of course we should reflect society and
But we should also understand the value of it as well. That's very important.
Can I ask why you think it shouldn't be something that we have to do?
Pardon?
Can I ask why you think it shouldn't be something that we feel we have to do?
No, I think we ethically we have to do it because we should reflect society, and certainly public organizations or governments have that moral responsibility. So I think it is, in that sense, the right thing to do. But I think it also should be understood. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the value of diversity. It's something, oh yeah, you have to do it because we are a diverse society, so therefore we should have diverse companies and diverse university, etc. And I think I'll mention it maybe in my vision talk also, but there's actually very strong academic proof that the actual quality of the research is much better, and the output, and also in companies, by having diversity in the teams. So and I think that's something we have to understand better.
I think Lyongo wants to react.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the numbers are quite simple. If somebody tells you, okay, you're allowed to choose out of a pond, and you're not allowed to use half of the pond or more, then you miss half of the talent that you could get. So it's quite simple. I mean, and I have said it before, I challenge any Dutch soccer coach to make a Dutch soccer squad without people with a migration background. Just see if you are the best, you can get the best team like that. And it's not different in any other field. You get more a different way of playing, a different way of doing research, but you must be willing to accept it. I mean, I don't know if you followed, I mean, I stay with soccer because it's quite clear to everyone, but at the beginning when the foreign players started to play in the Dutch squad, there was a lot of resistance. Yeah, but those are the Surinamese players, you can never count on them. They had all this bias, and the bias is still there. When Hakim Ziyech moved to Ajax, there was a lot of bias against him, but he was a great player. There was a lot of bias against Clarence Seedorf. I mean, AC Milan, in a country where I would say racism is definitely not less than in the Netherlands, they built a whole team around this player, but he was not good enough for the Dutch squad. And I don't know if you saw the interview with him, the college tour, because Clarence didn't accept to be just a player. He wanted to be part of making the rules. And that is where our society has a difficulty. As long as I'm in the backdrop, as a migrant or someone with a migration background, it's okay. The moment I speak up, I might be called aggressive, I might be called I don't understand, I might be called that I'm too sensitive when I portray something that is clearly there. And that is the difficulty that we have. So it's about quota. I hope that is just for a certain amount of time, but if we don't do anything, we have seen it with women in the top of the organizations, of commercial organizations, that it didn't work the other way. So you need these methods to enforce it a little bit, but I agree, I couldn't agree more that it's actually, has been quite some research on that a diverse company makes more profit.
So maybe to conclude, we all see something in this statement. We do think that it could work, but also we should not forget to listen to each other and really dig in deeper, like what can we actually learn from each other? I hope I give a good conclusion. Then we can continue, because actually right now we are interested in David and his vision about the TU Delft. You shortly already addressed it, but we would love to hear, since you just started.
Maybe I'll stand up for this. First of all, I have to confess I've only been working 2 weeks in this function. So this is my vision, and hopefully it will become the TU Delft's vision as well as time goes. But so we'll take the next slide. Thanks. So that's why I have the word building here, because we are just, in a way, starting. The diversity office is just getting going. We're now process of hiring people to man the office.
and that will take a little bit of time to get the right people on board and build things up and build our, but nevertheless, I'm already taking the initiative of putting some thoughts down and lobbying as we go along. So next slide. So first of all, in the university, we do see also, in some of the faculties, we had recently a well-being survey, and actually for the faculties, we're showing 8% discrimination. So we know there are some things to tackle here, and it's not unique to Delft. It is well known in other universities as well. So we are trying to get a stronger view on what's happening there. The problem, I think, with discrimination was kind of also hinted at here, was that people just tend to, it's often a subconscious process. It's not something you're really aware of, but I've seen it also in hiring process where people, they have a certain view of the mold of the kind of person that should be in that position, and that just plays in their mind. And the moment a candidate comes from a different background or a cultural different background, it just doesn't fit the mold. So it's kind of like the old boys club, just hiring people who you're familiar with, you feel at ease with, you know, okay, this person's not going to shake up things too much. It's going to be business as usual, and they're, in a way, somehow afraid of new perspectives. So that there is a kind of hidden or buried fear. So that's something that I've myself have noticed, having worked 20 years now in Delft. I think what's also really important is to create an inclusive environment so people really feel welcome here. And we need to convey that also in our website and our communications, because in the end of the day, it's also about attracting new students here from different diverse backgrounds and making them feeling welcome here. So we need to make a much stronger statement in our public relations as well. And of course, our incoming students need to reflect that diversity. Next slide. So these are some of the main points. So I just put in bold to kind of save time. So it's about safeguarding to encourage reflection and dialogue amongst ourselves, to create more empathy and awareness. It's also ensuring a sense of responsibility for diversity across the whole organization. So not only the student bodies I'm working with now, but also the staff and support staff. So it's going through the whole organization itself. We're trying to also see how we can improve and attract more diverse students, and also increasing our cultural communication skills. And also what's really important is the pipeline. So you can try to say, well, let's try to fix things on campus, but the problem already starts in the high school. And I know, for example, in the Science Center, some of my colleagues have been involved in running also these kinds of workshops with students where they learn new design technique, 3D printing, laser cutting, and they build prototypes and stuff. But if you look at the kids coming into the school, they're all white. No minority kids are being invited they're all kind of from the well-off high schools. Say, oh, come join our workshops here in the Science Center and learn about prototyping. And I actually did a study with a colleague of mine, Ingrid Mulder, at my faculty, and we actually had a graduation student working in Rotterdam, and we actually took students from an ROC education in a minority environment, and those students were actually following the program just to get subsidies, to get state subsidies, so they could just kind of hang out and collect money and not do anything. And she took this student took them into a Fab Lab environment in Rotterdam and let them do prototyping. And they made their own jewelry and keychains and things. And suddenly they realized, hey, they had these creative skills. They could actually think out of the box, and it increased their self-image immensely. It had such an impact on them and the way they looked at themselves and thought about themselves, and realized they could really do some cool modern things and use technology. And so I think that was a really nice example how we can do a lot more with minority students and try to attract them to Delft. And I think we also probably need to think about fellowships for minority students also with coming from non-Western backgrounds to attract them. Maybe that's something that maybe has to happen at a government level. And I don't think the university has to provide necessarily those fellowships, but that's something I think that the ministry should also try to stimulate. Okay, next slide. So this is just probably some of you are familiar with some of these figures, but well, we're on place 24 of 28 in Europe in terms of the number of female professors. So we're not doing very well on a European scale. Next slide. And what's very well known is this kind of scissor diagram where you see actually at the student level we're not doing that bad.
this is on a national level, in the Netherlands, this level. But as you move up in function, you have fewer females. And part of the problem is also our way of looking at academic output. For example, if a female person is out on maternity leave and out for a while, and they come back and maybe they're working part-time, and then they'll be evaluated as a full-time employee, so they'll never make the next level. So there's a lot of things that we need to compensate for and understand that if somebody's working part-time for whatever reason, that could be equivalent full-time, but they have dealing with maybe childcare and other things at home as well. So we have to carefully look at the way we promote people and think about what's behind the scenes. So it's very hard for women to pursue academic careers in general. And I think that's what we're seeing here in this diagram. Next graph, or next slide. And so my whole thing is about trying to be that more positive. I was hinting that in my comments today, but it's really about embracing our human potential and really thinking about a more positive approach to diversity. Next slide. And so it's really about growing together stronger. Next slide. And this is an example of a study that was done in Nature in 2014. They looked at 2.5 million publications, and they looked at the author names. And they found that if the authors were from the same background, looking at their names, like two Western names, and they compared them to articles written by multicultural authors based on their last names, that there was a much higher impact factor, that those articles were cited had much more academic value. So there you saw also in the academic world that the diverse authorships lead to more impactful papers. This is based on a large number of samples. Okay, next slide. And so I also already mentioned this gendered innovations, and you can see here at Stanford University, they're taking it quite seriously. There's a lot of emphasis on doing gendered innovation research, and they also have a whole diversity dashboard on their website, and they're tracking all the statistics and really promoting diversity as a very positive thing on campus. And I think that's it. My next slide is just I also want to mention that there's also now a national action plan for diversity and inclusivity in higher education. And so the government's also taking now action. They're providing also grants for students from minority backgrounds to apply for research grants. So I think that's also an excellent action. So we're seeing more support at the government level as well. You might want to look that up. That concludes my 5-minute pitch. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions for David and his vision of the TU Delft from the panel? No, it's a clear vision. Oh, from the audience, you can walk to the mic, or we can do it.
So, thanks. My name is Bas van der Pol. I work for AIR, which is the Rotterdam Architecture Institute. And in 2017, we invited Tony Griffin from Harvard, Just City Design Lab, to come over to Rotterdam and start the world's first masterclass in Just City Design. And we actually crafted this product with the Delft University, so I'm quite puzzled. You already have a great product there, which actually is a tool to design with these values that you have been talking about all evening. So it's already a product there to utilize and to put into practice. So first of all, I wanted to share that. And second, I would be very honored if we could try and initiate some kind of Just City Design lab here at Delft University, just by utilizing the knowledge that's already there and the research that's obviously being done here, and then to put it in practice, because there's a whole city only 15 minutes away waiting for this input and waiting to really utilize this knowledge. So this is what I want to put forward. And second of all, and this is something that perhaps I would like to add, is this beautiful film about the Australian Islamic Centre, which has been designed by Glenn Murcutt, the Australian architecture. And he's actually a white male, a senior white male. And he designed this mosque of course, with the Islamic community of Melbourne. And really take a look at that movie, because it's a very moving film. It's really about co-creation, about coming together and actually finding a new architectural language to design this building. And I think this is a very important dimension what we have to do in the upcoming years, given the fact that we have a more diverse society, actually to find new kinds of, architectural types even, or public space types even, at the fusion of different perspectives. So I think it's also a content-driven challenge that we have as a craft. So this is what I would like to add. So that's it. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I think we should definitely talk about it after the panel. Maybe it's good to focus on the next point of view, because we actually really would like to talk about education within this building. Also here we have some questions. First of all, so for Anagha and Aart, and David, if you have something, feel free to join. But maybe first for Aart, just to see the current situation within the faculty. In what way does BK Bouwkunde pay attention to inclusive designing and building?
Well, good question. Let me begin by being frank. I think it could be more. I contributed one thing to this panel, and that's inviting Roberto and Amy and mentioning that we had a new officer. I think what they're doing, the teaching they're doing, is extremely important. The first year lectures Amy is giving with views on the history of architecture, opening much broader perspectives than the perspective I was still brought up in, which is pretty much a Western European perspective. And I think what Roberto is doing with the master students, beginning with a lecture on intercultural cooperation, that's very important to set a tone. But I think we should ask ourselves, because we know you can learn in education that if you say something once, it'll stick for a couple of weeks and then it'll be gone. So you'll have to come back on it and say it again. So I think that's an important one. Is this something we keep, is it a question we keep asking? Is it something we keep bringing back? And it's not so much in the program as in the attitudes we have as teachers, our teachers have, and the attitudes we take as the ones responsible for the program. So frankly speaking, there is some work to be done.
Okay, and well, maybe because it is a topic right now, we are discussing it tonight. Is it on the agenda? Are there plans for addressing this theme within maybe education? Are there concrete plans?
Well, I'm mentioning the teachers that are working on it. We do see a growing diversity, for instance, in tenure trackers we've been attracting. So that's a way to do it. In the end, teaching is about people. It's very important who the teachers are and what they're bringing in. But I think also here, well, we're looking now very much at our practice teachers, and we're looking at new ways of assessing. And that can also be an instrument to see, okay, who are we inviting from practice to teach here? And what are we looking at when we invite them?
Okay, but maybe then, because it's a lot of the education is provided by teachers, I think. So maybe for the, it's unfortunate that Bo is not here because she would have represented the bachelor. But who is going, let's say, about the grondslagen? Who is responsible for the inhoud?
The point of view, or the?
Yeah, who
well,
is
Amy is one of the
it?
persons teaching in grondslagen.
Amy.
And you're doing very well. I'm not saying you're responsible. No, but
not to point fingers. I mean, that's
no,
the last thing I want to do. But
you're absolutely right to mention that, but that's extremely important. And I was very happily surprised. I was just new here, and one of the first lectures I went to hear happened to be Amy's lecture. And it began from what I thought was a very traditional way. This is Western European architecture. And in a beautiful way, she slowly started turning around the perspective and showing us how we've always been looking at a specific way for a long time, even excluding other cultures. If you're not in the classical tradition, pretty soon you're either primitive or pre-Columbian, whatever that is, or how important was Columbus for the development of architecture in Mexico. So thinking about that is, I think, very important, and we should do that right from the start, but we should keep on doing it. And there we can question, do we do it enough? but also again what Roberto is doing, making us aware what it means that we have, I think this year, 44 nationalities coming in to this school and work together. And it can be, you mentioned language. A good friend of mine is teaching philosophy in the Rietveld Academy, and they've been internationalized for a long time. And he says, when I give my first lecture, I always explain that I, as a teacher, may be using words that have a meaning that I think I understand what I'm saying. But for you, from 44 other cultures, those words can mean different things. So you can be insulted by what I say, or it can be come across to you as something completely different. So he always begins by saying, please tell me. Please stand up and tell me that you experience my words in a certain way, but do it in a way that we can talk about it. And I think that may seem very simple, but that already is a very important start, that we are aware that our languages are different, even if we all speak English, but we speak a Dutch English or an Indian English or a Chinese English, that even on that level we should be aware of each other and find ways to discuss that one. That's why it's very important that we open with that kind of lectures.
Okay, well, I hope it won't stay only at lectures. Okay, I see two people.
Oh, can I just build on this? I think in your emails before you mentioned this question with also reference to the learning goals. So why is sustainability on the learning goals and inclusiveness not? And I think it's a really important question. I'm also asking that question, honestly. And I think that it's also a question of power. Who decides these things? And I think we need to be having more input from the students in terms of what gets taught here. I also think we need to be having a more focused strategic conversation about inclusiveness. So, I mean, I've been talking to our dean, Dick, a little bit about possibly setting up some kind of diversity task force or committee that involves students and staff and administrators and everyone together to start thinking about these questions, which include the curriculum. So what are we teaching? What gets taught? I do also think it's an issue of helping teachers to know how to do it and also to give them training, to give us training. I think we need training, honestly, in things like implicit bias, but also maybe a hint towards the kind of resources we could be using, the way that we could expand our own knowledge of these things, because most of us, honestly, were taught in this very Eurocentric canon too. So there's also a process of learning that the teachers have to do. So I think, yeah.
Well, maybe
we all need training.
We all need training, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's an important realization, because we are not, I personally don't think it's useful to confront people in a way that's saying, you are racist and you're horrible. But let's, like Aart just said, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe just to interrupt you, hold that thought, because I think we have a point of view from Aart right now, but Anagha is also there. We also have some questions for you.
Yes, I think it's interesting to know also how it is as a student, and are you actually now stimulated as a student to think about inclusiveness right now? So I think it's really interesting to see your point of view. So.
No, of course. I can't agree less with Aart when he said something about, like, of course, me being an international student, coming from India, coming to a new place, I mean, a new country altogether. But, of course, it's super new for me. And, of course, there are several other thousands of students who are also on the same boat as me. And that actually makes it more comfortable in that sense to be part of a faculty such as BK or even TU Delft, be associated with TU Delft, because I know there are a lot more like me. So it's one thing is about relatability is what I would say, because I know I have so many others who are also, like I said, on the same boat. So the university's diverse student population that's what I really want to cover first, which is very welcoming and inviting. Second is the language as a barrier, because this is something that also Aart mentioned. We can speak about Netherlands per se right now, because though Dutch is the most commonly spoken language, it's not like nobody would understand me when I speak English. There is a certain level of comfort for people to accept English, and that's where I can, again, relate to people here, you know, and that becomes one bridge through which I can maybe also convey my feeling or me or my feelings and my my point of view, basically, to others, you know. So that becomes also something that makes me feel included, yeah, if I can put it that way. So that's another thing, and which is, again, coming to my cultural background per se, I would say not everybody really knows what really lies in India, or the, you know, the political, the societal, the kind of tiers that we have. I mean, though it's been heard of, spoken of, you know, and you know certain references that you could associate it to, but I would still say that, of course, I don't think it's really identified or known or valued per se, because they don't really know what to value, right? I mean, and it's not their fault. It's just that they don't know. You know, so it's about that awareness, and that's where I think I would tie back to what Roberto and Amy was saying about training. You know, so I think that would be something that would really help also teachers to know where we come from, know about what background we possibly have about architecture, what sort of things also come from there, and so on. So that is something that would be really interesting to see, personally, for me. And yeah, I think. Yeah, there were more points coming in, but I think I lost my trail of thought. But
Thank
this
you.
is good for now.
Are there any questions to Aart or to Anagha or to David?
If I can just, on the subject of language, I think it's a really interesting discussion, because I think it's a two-way street. So I think, of course, you should feel at ease speaking in English, and people should accept that. But I think the other way around, I always speak to Dutch people in Dutch. And because I think we have to also understand their perspective. And language is, there are very subtle aspects in every language for communication purposes, and also reflects the culture and understanding in each other. And I feel much more at ease speaking to a Dutch person in Dutch than in English, even though English is my native language. So I think it's a two-way thing. And I actually did my PhD in Eindhoven, and I worked at the Institute for Perception Research. And when I came to that institute, I did first 2 weeks with the nuns and Regina Colli. You know, they always advertise on the radio that there was no more nuns there. But so it was 2-week intensive Dutch. And after 1 week, I got a call, and my PhD was supposed to be in English, the whole program. I got a call from the manager, and he said, you know, by the way, David, our first meeting is going to be in Dutch when you get back. I'm like, oh, that wasn't the agreement. But they really encouraged anybody who, let's say, come for more than 2 years to learn the language. And it was really emphasized, and it was kind of an expectation. And then later, I mean, this was before things were less international. So, of course, university has become much more international, and it makes more sense to learn English and to use English in our education. I'm totally for that. But I think in interacting like with colleagues, it's really good if I have a Dutch colleague just to speak in Dutch. So it's, and then they have to struggle with my Dutch versus me having to struggle with their English.
No, I can't agree less. It's true, but like, yeah, then again, I think it's just that one sort of relevant, or, you know, that feeling of relatability. If there's just, I understand when you say that, because also when there are other Indians around in my own, say, class of students, I know I can relate much better with them than, say, a Dutch classmate in that sense. So, yeah, I can't agree more. But
okay,
yeah.
One question for Lyongo, I think, and then we go to the next statement.
Yeah, well, I wanted to make a comment. I think it's for the Netherlands to start off with a proper historic education in history. There is parts of the Dutch history that are skipped in different, especially the Dutch colonial background is skipped completely in the history education of students, not only, especially at a high school level. So I think, with all due respect, it's easier for a Dutch to accept you as an Indian than to accept a Moroccan professor. Or someone with a Moroccan descent being a professor. And that's what we have to work at as a Dutch society, to start realizing that when you see, if they see a black person that is cleaning, it's fine. But see a black person as an architect, there comes the difficulty. And we have so subtle structures where we keep that in place. I don't know if you know the professor, or former professor, Bob Pinedo. He was an oncologist. He was actually the one that introduced oncology in the Netherlands. He is a Curaçaoean, but when he was introduced by Ivo Nier at his talk show television, he was introduced as the Dutch oncologist born in Curaçao. Now that's fine, it's true, he's Dutch. But if we do the same when someone robs or someone steals or kills someone and he was born in Curaçao, we don't do, then he is a Curaçaoean. And those systems are so subtle. It goes as far as, I don't know if you know Suren Di Martina, the runner. When he won the 100 meters, he was Dutch. When he was disqualified on the 200 meters, he was a Curaçaoean. And that is how subtle our systems are in maintaining the structure that white is better, that the Moroccan is less, that the Antillean is less, and the Surinamese is less. We don't, and those are the things we have to tackle, and we have to start by a proper education in history, that you know that I am completely Dutch, that you don't need to ask me that second question, but where are you really from? Because we don't know. A lot of young people don't know why we have Moroccans in the Netherlands. But you brought them here. And we tend to forget that Konimax is from Indonesia. Those are Indonesian ingredients, but we call them Dutch now. You eat shawarma after you went out, but that's not Dutch, but you have made it Dutch. And that's how we have to accept. Just like, I've said it many times, we accept Baudet as being a Dutch name, but we don't accept Alawi as being a Dutch name. But it's the same. They came from somewhere else and they became Dutch.
I think, great. I think it's really interesting to go to the next statement, also with your comment on the history. Oh, sorry.
I would like to comment. I'm a classmate of Anagha. Like she said, she feels very included, but there are a lot of Indian students in Delft. But as a black person, I literally, this is my second year, my first year, I literally almost know black students. Like I can see them, and the fact that it excites me to see another black student should tell you that Delft has a lot of things to work on, and I hope that the new diversity office gets to work on these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Yeah, she's gone, but we really have to talk about this, and the next statement is also about that. While Yael is looking for the remote. By barely addressing the theme of inclusiveness, the faculty does not take responsibility in the delivery of well-prepared students. So I think we talked about it already a lot, but so I think you have a lot to comment on this statement. So is there someone who wants to start? I see Lyongo with his mic, so Lyongo.
Yes, some of you are reaching the age that you are going to have children. And when you think about inclusiveness, it's about the choices you made when you are alone in the comfort of your family. For instance, which school do you choose your child to go to? So if you realize that your society is built of that you are, you know, you have more than 50% of people with a migration background, and you choose for a completely white school, or a school with majority of white, are you actually preparing your child for the society that your child will have to live and work in? So when you're answering this, I think it's very important to keep that thought in mind. What are you being prepared to work, where are you being prepared to work at and for?
Thank you. Someone else who wants to comment?
I think there is a number of public challenges that we have to face and to which we are ill-prepared. We all need training, but we need to shift our education, I think, to look at these public challenges. So we have to learn how to design cities that are resilient to climate change, to COVID-19, but also that are socially sustainable, where people are different than you are. So that is a very important component of an education. It's not something far from architecture. It is in architecture and the built environment.
If I'm, because I guess there's quite some architecture students, to make that concrete, greenery. What is the use of greenery? What does greenery mean for the people that live in that surroundings? I mean, everywhere in Amsterdam, in every park, I see signs coming up that is not allowed to barbecue. So who has decided that it's not allowed to barbecue in public parks? And if that is what the majority of the people want to do, why is it not allowed? Who is deciding that? So it's about realizing who are you designing for, and that is that question about diversity.
I think
well, I'm afraid
say something.
All we can say is yes, it's terribly, but it's true. If we don't do this, we do not take our responsibility, and maybe we do not take it enough. I try to think about it because, how should I say it? As a faculty, we have a lot of people here from different cultures, students, staff. There is this debate which is serious and which is aggressive towards some people. We just heard the student, she feels discriminated. You've been telling us about what it means to feel discriminated. That's one side we should deal with. But there's also another part. I was brought up in a family that traveled a lot, in which culture and art was very important. Artists come from all over the world. I've also seen the power of it and the incredible inspiration. So that's another side we should also look at. The simple fact that we all represent different cultures, we bring in such a richness, and all of a sudden there's so much more. This incredibly dead classical tradition, how many more pillars can we see? And how long have we seen, okay, this is architectural history, and then there's some volumes on, there would be one volume on the whole Asian tradition, which is huge and incredibly rich. So I think that's another side of it also, that by embracing this richness of culture, so much more possibilities open to us. And we open our minds, and we open ways of solving problems, of designing, of thinking. I just heard a tiny example of a group of students, some Chinese and some Dutch were working together, and language was a problem. And somebody came up with a brilliant idea. They asked the Chinese students some main, how do you say that, themes we're working on. What are they in Chinese? Give us the characters. And they looked at the characters and used the characters, and that gave an extreme inspiration, because a Chinese character designates things in a very different way than we do with letters. So simply, again, on that level of language already, you can have so much inspiration. You can look in such different ways. So we should, on the one hand, be very much aware about the discriminatory aspects, but at the same time, we should also embrace the possibilities of richness in culture, ideas that we have in the house.
Well, maybe it's really interesting to go see the next statement because it's actually about this. Because we also see the potential within the faculty, among the staff, the faculty members and the students. It's a really diverse group. But we actually stated here that it's not used right now. So it's actually different from the story that you just told. And I was actually wondering maybe if somebody wants to comment on that. I see Anagha. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think I can't agree less again with the statement, because it is true that though there is so much diversity within, say, the student population itself, it's not always that, you know, references are really tied or taken, or even professors in that sense. If you look at guest lectures as well, I think we could really agree there would be someone as credible as, you know, somebody else that they would probably call from, say, the European countries, versus maybe if you look outside and, you know, kind of get more even guest lecturers from other countries and, you know, cultures. I think then that would also bring more relatable, you know, sort of inclusiveness in that sense, you know. So that's where we could really target also diversity, because we do have diverse students, but do we have that many diverse teachers, you know? So what is that sort of balance we're trying to make here, you know? And also when we saw the numbers of the male and the female, you know, diversity within teachers, as you saw it from the students to the teachers, it really decreased, right? So then where is that balance? How are we trying to strike it? We know it doesn't exist, but then how are we really going to, yeah, bridge that gap? I think.
Yes, I wanted to comment on something that Aart said. He just said it very fast. It's about a pillar. And the Dutch way of thinking is very much in pillars, the zuilen. But what I would love to see happening is that we stop thinking in pillars. To make it very personal, I mean, I'm half Curacao, half Dutch, so which pillar do I fit in? Then I married my wife that's half Moroccan and half Dutch. So what pillar do my children fit in? Then my wife is so half Muslim, half Protestant, I'm Catholic. In which religious pillar do I fit? So we have to realize that our way of thinking in the Netherlands that was so structured in pillars is still so much present at this moment. So once you start thinking about diversity and inclusion, you have to realize that you have to change something very drastic in your way of thinking, because your thinking was organized in pillars for many years. When the foreigners came, we created the pillar for the foreigners. But the idea of inclusion is that you get rid of the pillars and get this real mix of the human race.
I have a question for Roberto, because you are working at this faculty, and do you think there's actually a conversation between students and staff to learn from each other, or is it not? So
I think we could be doing much, much better. But I have to tell you that I've been working here for 17 years already, and I've seen it change. It changed a lot. And I totally recognize the pillar system that people got used to. So there is a Protestant pillar, a Catholic pillar, etc., Moroccan pillar, I don't know. And that is really not helping, because you tolerate. And tolerance is important. We need tolerance, but we need recognition, respect, and we need to like other people. So like other cultures, not only tolerate them. So I think this appreciation for things. But to answer your question, we could still be doing much, much better, right? I am from Brazil myself. So I have been put in some pillars myself, and that has really bothered me because I didn't fit, actually. So, and I can kind of see that students also feel bothered when you say, oh, you know, Chinese, they are so organized and they are quiet and they are going to work so hard. I've had Chinese students tell me, I'm not like that, I'm different. I have a personality. So I think we have to pay much more attention to that.
Is there someone who has a comment still on this statement? Because otherwise we are... Yes, yeah, you can walk to the mic, I think.
It's actually quite interesting using the pillar example because I read an article in the NRC and it was it was from the Rijksbouwmeester, so Floris Alkemade, and he did a survey how to build in the future, and he proposed 4 new pillars actually, how to continue building and how to how to view the future, how to build, and it is about the cosmopolitans. So D66, GroenLinks, the traditionals, so CDA from the countryside, the new Dutch like Islamic. And the PVV people, the people who stay behind, and it's actually they said it was best to stick to the pillars and to strengthen them, but to keep sending the children to their Islamic schools and etc. So how should you think about that?
But they also said to really invest in. Actually, maybe the language. So what can we learn from each other? So keep the backgrounds really in the pillar. So stay in your D66 books or Denk books, but really invest in what can I learn from your books and what. So I guess because that was also in it.
But what happens when you want to change pillars and you don't fit in the pillar? Can you? Are you allowed?
Question.
Huh?
Floris Alkemade is also coming in 2 weeks, maybe. No, we don't know. But yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
There's a famous book by Mr. Leibhardt, Verzuiling and Pacificatie. That was an early study on this verzuiling in the Netherlands. Well, he points out that the important thing is that we've always been very good, the Dutch have been good at making coalitions. So yes, there was this pillarization, but at the same time, we've always been making coalitions. So in a way, maybe that's what Floris is pointing at. Can we use the best of 2 sides? Can we empower people by being in a pillar, but can we at the same time continue or, I think, renew and innovate that system of pacification? Because before the war, the pacification was done on a higher level. So like on a government level or the level of the bishops, they agreed like, okay, you keep your people in your pillar, I keep my people in my pillar, and together we'll make sure that we run nicely this country. Well, in the 60s and 70s, people started breaking out of their pillars. That system kind of began tumbling down. Now we have to reinvent how are we going to continue this Dutch democracy and this need to work together to keep our feet dry. And so maybe this is an attempt to reinvent the system of pillarization and pacification.
Lyongo, how do you feel about this new pillar system?
I wonder which pillar I have to put my daughters in. So that's one. One thing, you know, what we have to realize is when you accept other cultures, it's just it adds on to your culture. We are so afraid of losing things, but you never lose anything. You're there. So if you lose it, it's because you are willing to lose it. But you are able to add to your culture, and that is what I fight for. What I think that you should do. I mean, I have added Because coming from two cultures from birth, biologically also, and living in different countries, you add on, you choose. I choose from the Curacilinian culture. Some things I do are very Curacilinian, and some things I do are very Dutch. And then other things I have adapted from my wife, which is half Moroccan. So don't be afraid that you're going to lose anything. So if you want to keep to the pillar that you are, that's okay, that's fine with me, but I don't have a pillar, so I have to do it differently. But do open yourself to receive the other. That's the main thing. I mean, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe because we only have 10 minutes left, we actually, oh, we have 5 minutes left. Oh, you're so streng. Yeah, we have one final question to see what we can learn from each other and how the future actually will look like, maybe to narrow it down within this faculty. Yeah, how are we going to design the inclusive world? What can we say about it? Is there something?
There's something I want to share because it maybe some people are starting to feel like a little heavy, and but you know, it's actually Rietveld, Gerrit Rietveld, designed the building in Curaçao, which very few people know, and it's still one of the best examples, not only seen by Dutch, but seen by people from the architects from the Caribbean, the best example of modern tropical architecture. Modern Caribbean architecture. He only spent 1 week in Curaçao. So that I found so inspiring, and that also inspires me because I would never accept that I would not be able to design, let's say, the community hall for a complete white village somewhere in the north of the Netherlands. Yes, I could do it, but I must be aware that I don't know that culture very good and that I have to listen to the people. So there are examples within the Dutch Architecture Society that have proven that it's possible.
Thank you. So I don't think we need a pillar system, but what do we need at this faculty?
I'm not from this faculty, but I do think, to kind of summarize things, is that the pillars can be positive in terms of creating the diversity we're looking for, so bringing in different perspectives, because if we all melt everything together, then we lose the perspectives as well. So, but then on the other hand, like Yael was suggesting, it's also understanding each other and being open and being able to hop pillars, so to speak, and look at other perspectives. But I do think that the strength is in the diversity itself, so we shouldn't mitigate that. And I know there's a lot of problems in the United States. There's a lot of societal problems there, for sure. I know that. But if you look at like in some of the more urban big cities, it doesn't matter what your skin color is or your ethnicity. You're just an American. It doesn't matter. You're just seen as an American. And I think that there's something positive in that, and that people do work together and integrate in a certain way in the bigger urban areas, not so much in the rural areas, the big cities. And that but they still maintain their own ethnicity and their own identity, but they are able to create this kind of melting pot atmosphere and not confronting people necessarily. Of course, I'm talking more about a certain element of the population that's more, say, a bit more open to diversity, and there's a lot of other discrimination problems and all kinds we know all about the problems in the United States, so I'm not generalizing it. But if some of the big urban areas, and it's also interesting that when I came first to the Netherlands, my wife, she's Dutch, she had lived 10 years abroad with me in different countries, and she had a real culture shock. We came to Eindhoven, the Brabant, and she was used to being in a more urban area. We were then in Los Angeles, and we came into the Brabant, and there were all housewives there, and she was completely in depression. She didn't know what to do with her life. I said, just find some volunteer work, do something. I was great because I was in a nice institute with an international setting, and so she had a culture shock coming back into the Dutch society, which I thought was really interesting too.
Well, maybe to bring it back to the faculty, Amy, I also saw that you wanted to say something, or?
Yeah, I think we just have to be brave, honestly, and do some things that feel quite uncomfortable at the beginning. I think that also means being very clear about what we don't tolerate as a faculty. I think that's something that hasn't happened, particularly over the last 6 months. There was no statement about Black Lives Matter. There was no statement about Black Lives Matter in the university. And I think that we have a responsibility as an institution to say those things out loud and not leave it up to the students, frankly. And that doesn't just go for Black Lives Matter, that goes for discrimination, intolerance, harassment of any kind. And I think, you know, David, you mentioned this about being much more explicit about this in the PR. And I think it is about, like, you know, communicating a message as well. So as positive as diversity and inclusion are, and I think all these things that we've been talking about are, you know, really, really inspiring and great things to look forward to, we also have to address what exists now, and unfortunately it's not a great picture. So we have to be brave and take a step and, yeah, do some awkward things.
Thank you very much, Amy. I think these words are nice words to end this evening with.
I'd just like to add one
thing. Okay, one last comment
about
from the students.
What the future could be. Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to really have a diverse sort of board in place, maybe, where people can really go and, you know, speak what they feel. Like, for instance, my own classmate currently, when she kind of voiced her opinion and the way she feels. I mean, of course, each one has their own kind of experience that they come with and they feel and all that. So I think it'll be really nice if they have a platform where they can voice it. So maybe that is something that we could do in near future and take like the first step towards inclusive, diversity.
Okay, we have to be brave and we have to talk with each other in the end. So
no more fairy tales.
Thank you very much, Lyongo, Amy, Roberto, Anagha, Aart, and David for being here. This was the first BK Talks, and hopefully it's the first step to designing a more inclusive world. And I hope that this is not the last conversation we have, but the starting point. So hopefully see you soon, and there will be a lot of other interesting subjects also on the BK Talk. So thank you very much for this evening, and see you soon.